While I was in Tokyo closing the biggest deal of my career, my wife emptied our joint accounts, took our children, and filed for divorce, claiming abandonment. My name is Ethan Mercer, 41 years old, former SVP of International Development at Altura Technologies, now fighting to reclaim my life and reunite with my kids. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stepped off the 14-hour flight from Tokyo to Boston, feeling exhausted but triumphant. The Nakamura contract would transform our company's future, a $47 million deal I'd spent 18 months cultivating. As the plane taxied to the gate, I switched off airplane mode, expecting the usual flood of congratulatory messages from the executive team. Instead, my phone exploded with urgent voicemails from my bank, my neighbor, and a law firm I'd never heard of. The first call was from TD Bank's fraud department. There had been unusual activity on our accounts, multiple large transfers totaling over $870,000 in the past 72 hours. My stomach dropped. That was nearly our entire life savings, including my year-end bonus and stock options I'd finally cashed. Out to put toward our dream house in Vermont, the second call was from my neighbor, Richard. "Ethan, I'm not sure what's going on, but I saw Vanessa and the kids loading up a moving truck yesterday. When I asked if everything was okay, she said, 'You were relocating to California for work. Call me back, man.'" The third call was from Littleton and Associates, informing me that they represented my wife in divorce proceedings and that I should direct all communication through them. A temporary restraining order had been filed, along with emergency custody of our children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Noah, citing abandonment and emotional neglect. I was legally barred from entering my own home. I stood frozen in the terminal, travelers streaming past me, my world collapsing like a house of cards. Vanessa and I had been married for 11 years. Just 3 weeks ago, before my trip, we'd been discussing renovation plans for the kitchen. Sure, things hadn't been perfect. My work schedule had been brutal the past year, but there had been no indication she was planning this nuclear option. I hailed a cab, directing it toward the modest Cambridge colonial we'd purchased 6 years ago when I made director. As we neared the neighborhood, I asked the driver to slow down. From the street, our house looked different already. The curtains were drawn. Vanessa always kept them open during the day. Emma's bike wasn't in its usual spot on the porch. The Boston University sticker Vanessa had proudly displayed in the window, her alma mater, was gone. "Keep driving," I told the cabbie, pulling out my phone to call Kevin Burton, my college roommate who'd become a family law attorney. It went to voicemail. "Kevin, it's Ethan. Emergency situation. Vanessa has taken the kids, emptied our accounts, and filed for divorce while I was in Japan. I need your help. Call me ASAP." My mind raced through possible motivations. Had she met someone else? Was this about the Christmas argument over my work hours, or the spring break trip I'd missed because of the Nakamura negotiations? Nothing seemed significant enough to warrant this level of calculated destruction. The cab driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay back there, sir?" I realized I'd been breathing heavily, almost hyperventilating. "No," I answered honestly, "but I'm working on it. Take me to the Marriott on Tremont Street." That night, in an anonymous hotel room, I laid out what I knew. Vanessa had filed the divorce papers 3 days after I'd left for Tokyo, a 2-week business trip she'd known about for months. The timing couldn't be coincidental. She'd been planning this, waiting for me to be on the other side of the world. Before executing her strategy, I pulled out my laptop and tried logging into our joint accounts. Access denied. I checked our investment portfolio. Empty. College funds for the kids transferred to accounts I couldn't access. Even our joint credit cards had been maxed out with cash advances. At 2 a.m., Kevin finally called back. "Jesus, Ethan, I just listened to your message. What the hell happened?" I explained everything, my voice breaking when I mentioned being separated from the kids. I don't understand, Kevin. How could she even do this legally? It's not exactly legal, but it's not uncommon, Kevin explained. She's exploiting the system. Filing emergency orders when you're out of the country means you can't immediately contest them. Courts tend to preserve the status quo once children are involved, which means temporary orders often become permanent arrangements unless aggressively challenged. So I just roll over and accept this? My voice rose, anger finally breaking through the shock. Absolutely not, Kevin replied firmly. But you need to be strategic. Vanessa clearly has a plan and legal representation already in place. We need to understand what we're dealing with before counterfiling. Sleep was impossible that night. I scrolled through photos of Emma and Noah on my phone. Emma missing her 2 front teeth at her last birthday party. Noah proudly holding up a fish we'd caught on our camping trip last summer. Vanessa and I renewing our vows on our 10th anniversary in Hawaii, looking blissfully happy, or so I thought. The next morning I met Kevin at his office in downtown Boston. He'd already pulled the court filings. These allegations are serious, Ethan. She's claiming a pattern of emotional abandonment, prioritizing work over family. She's documented every business trip, every missed school event, every late night at the office for the past 3 years. I stared at him in disbelief. That's called having a career that supports our family. She knew what my job entailed when we decided she'd stay home with the kids. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kevin nodded sympathetically. I know, but she's painting a picture of a workaholic father who's essentially abandoned his family responsibilities. And the financial moves are concerning. Has she ever shown interest in your company's stock options or compensation structure? I thought back to conversations over the past year. She started asking more questions after my promotion last spring. Wanted to understand my equity position when options vested. I thought she was just taking more interest in our financial future. She was preparing, Kevin said bluntly. And she chose your longest business trip to execute her plan. The question is why now, specifically? That question haunted me as I spent the next 3 days in a daze, moving between the hotel, Kevin's office, and meetings with a forensics accountant Kevin had recommended. I tried calling Vanessa repeatedly, but her number was already disconnected. I emailed her parents, who'd always seemed to like me, but received only a terse reply. Vanessa has explained the situation. We're supporting our daughter and grandchildren during this difficult time. The court had scheduled an emergency hearing for the following Monday, 6 days away. Kevin advised against attempting to see the children before then, despite every instinct screaming at me to find them. You violate that temporary restraining order, even if it was inappropriately granted, and you hand her attorney ammunition, he warned. While the forensic accountant traced the money trail, I focused on understanding Vanessa's motivation. This level of calculation suggested something beyond normal marital dissatisfaction. I called my assistant at Altura, asking her to send me my complete travel schedule for the past 2 years. When it arrived, I spread the calendar on the hotel, a desk, looking for patterns. That's when I noticed something. My heaviest travel periods coincided with key financial events, bonus payouts, stock vestings, the closing of our company's acquisition by a larger firm, which had triggered a significant retention package. Vanessa hadn't just been tracking my absences, she'd been tracking my compensation. The night before my trip to Tokyo, we'd received notice that the final installment of my acquisition bonus, $1, $2 million before taxes, would be deposited the following week. I'd mentioned it over dinner, talked about finally having enough. For the Vermont property we'd been eyeing, she'd seemed pleased, suggested we celebrate with a nice bottle of wine. It was the last puzzle piece. She hadn't just been planning to leave me, she'd been waiting for the optimal financial moment. The Tokyo trip wasn't just convenient timing, it was the triggering event she'd been waiting for. The forensic accountant confirmed my suspicion the next day. She's moved approximately $920,000 through a series of accounts, he explained, pointing to a complex flowchart. Some went to a new account in her name only, some to her parents, and a significant portion, about $340,000, went to an LLC registered 3 months ago in Nevada. Care to guess who the sole officer of the company is? Vanessa, I said. Close. Her brother, Tyler, the one who works in real estate in Los Angeles. Suddenly, Richard's voicemail made sense. The story about relocating to California. The ICU, money, the kids, everything was likely already there with her brother. Kevin nodded grimly when I shared this theory. That tracks with what my investigator found. Vanessa's brother purchased a home in Manhattan Beach 4 months ago, paid cash for a place that should have been well beyond his means as a mid-level real estate agent. So she's been planning this for at least 4 months, I said, the betrayal cutting deeper with each revelation. What about the kids? Are they in California? Almost certainly, and that complicates things jurisdictionally. If she's established residence there with them, we may need to fight this on 2 fronts. I pushed back from the table, pacing Kevin's office. This isn't just about money. Why take the kids? I've always been an involved father when I'm home. We've never even had a custody disagreement. Kevin's expression told me he had a theory: child support and potential alimony. With your income level, if she gets primary custody in California, the support calculations would be significantly higher than in Massachusetts. Plus, California is a community property state. So my children are essentially financial leverage, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. In the most cynical interpretation, yes, but we don't go into court with that accusation. We need to be smarter. Over the next 2 days, we assembled our counter-strategy. The forensic accountant documented every unauthorized transfer. The investigator confirmed the children's presence at Tyler's Manhattan Beach home, and Kevin prepared emergency motions to freeze remaining assets and establish temporary custody arrangements. The morning of the hearing arrived, and I hardly recognized myself in the mirror. 5 days of minimal sleep and maximum stress had left me looking haggard. Kevin had coached me extensively: remain calm, show restraint, focus on the children's well-being rather than the financial aspects. Her attorney's going to try to provoke you, he warned as we walked into the courthouse. They want the angry, workaholic executive who puts career before family. Don't give them that. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, intimate almost, which made the shock of seeing Vanessa at the opposing table even more jarring. She was impeccably dressed in a conservative blue suit I'd never seen before, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that emphasized her natural beauty. She didn't meet my eyes. Beside her sat a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, Diane Littleton. Herself, according to Kevin's whisper, she's built her practice on high-net-worth divorces, very aggressive, very effective. Judge Martha Henning, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the court to order. Littleton spoke first, painting a picture of me as a chronically absent father who prioritized career advancement over family responsibilities. She detailed my travel schedule, 146 days away from home in the past year alone, and recounted instances when I'd missed school events or family obligations. Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer reached her breaking point during her husband's most recent extended absence, a 2-week trip to Japan that was merely the latest in a pattern of abandonment. She feared for her financial security and the stability of her children's future, given Mr. Mercer's demonstrated priorities. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, as Littleton systematically dismantled my reputation as a husband and father. Kevin placed a warning hand on my arm as Littleton continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Mercer had reasonable concerns about financial dissipation. Mr. Mercer has been increasingly secretive about company matters, discussing potential relocation overseas and making concerning statements about jurisdictional advantages of offshore banking. That was a blatant lie. I'd never said anything remotely similar. I scribbled a furious note to Kevin, who nodded almost imperceptibly. When Kevin's turn came, he approached the podium with measured confidence. Your Honor, what we've just heard is a masterclass in projection and pretext. The timeline and financial evidence tell a very different story. With methodical precision, Kevin laid out our findings, the months of planning, the strategic timing of Vanessa's actions, the systematic transfer of assets, and the coordinated relocation to California. Mrs. Mercer didn't fear for her financial security, Your Honor. She orchestrated a sophisticated plan to secure the maximum financial advantage while deliberately separating Mr. Mercer from his children at the precise moment when his largest career achievement was realized. I watched Vanessa's face as Kevin detailed the money transfers. Her composed expression faltered briefly when he mentioned the Nevada LLC and her brother's surprising real estate purchase. Littleton leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Kevin continued, Mr. Mercer acknowledges his demanding career, one that has provided the very comfortable lifestyle Mrs. Mercer has enjoyed, but he categorically rejects the characterization of his relationship with his children. Despite his work obligations, Mr. Mercer has been a devoted and engaged father. He submitted statements from Emma's soccer coach, Noah's preschool teacher, and several family friends, attesting to my involvement in the children's lives. Then he played his strongest card. Most telling, Your Honor, is this communication from Mrs. Mercer herself, sent just 3 weeks before her coordinated actions. He presented an email Vanessa had sent to her sister, which our investigator had uncovered. In it, she wrote, Ethan's been so great with the kids lately, despite his crazy schedule. Sometimes I feel guilty about what I'm planning, but I keep reminding myself this is about long-term security. I heard Vanessa's sharp intake of breath. Littleton's expression darkened as she frantically whispered to her client. Your Honor, Kevin concluded, this case isn't about protecting children from an absent father. It's about a calculated financial strategy that uses children as leverage. We ask the court to see through this transparent maneuver, return the children to Massachusetts, where they have resided their entire lives, and restore financial order to what has been nothing short of systematic appropriation of marital assets. Judge Henning studied both parties over her reading glasses. I've seen quite a few emergency custody and restraining orders in my time on the bench, she said finally. Rarely have I seen one so thoroughly undermined by evidence in the initial hearing. She turned her gaze directly to Vanessa. Mrs. Mercer, did you transfer these assets as alleged? Littleton stood quickly. Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer took reasonable steps to secure marital assets she feared would be hidden, or I asked Mrs. Mercer, not counsel, Judge Henning interrupted sharply. Vanessa rose slowly, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, Your Honor, but I believed I was protecting our family's financial future. By emptying joint accounts of nearly $1 million while your husband was overseas, filing under emergency provisions, that prevented his immediate response and relocating your children to another state without notice or consent. The judge's tone made the question clearly rhetorical. This court takes a very dim view of using emergency provisions and children as tactical advantages in matrimonial disputes. Judge Henning's ruling was decisive. The temporary restraining order was dissolved immediately. All transferred assets were to be returned to joint control within 48 hours. Most importantly, the children were to be returned to Massachusetts within 72 hours, with temporary shared custody established until a formal hearing could address permanent arrangements. As we stood to leave, I finally caught Vanessa's eye across the courtroom. There was no remorse there, only cold calculation and something else. Surprise, perhaps, that her carefully constructed plan had unraveled so quickly. Littleton approached Kevin as we exited the courtroom. "This is just the first round," she said quietly. "My client still has substantial grounds for primary custody and financial support." Kevin smiled pleasantly. "Perhaps you should review the additional evidence we haven't yet presented, Diane. I think you'll find your negotiating position weaker than you imagine." He handed her a sealed envelope. "A courtesy preview. We'd prefer to settle this reasonably for the children's sake." "What was that?" I asked as Littleton walked away, clutching the envelope. "Insurance," Kevin replied. "Emails between Vanessa and her brother discussing quite explicitly their plan to maximize financial extraction. Their words, not mine. And her acknowledgement that you've been a good father despite everything. Our investigator found them when tracing the Nevada LLC connections." For the first time in a week, I felt a glimmer of hope. The legal battle was far from over, but the initial victory gave me breathing room. The most important thing was that Emma and Noah would be home in 3 days. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Kevin squeezed my shoulder. "This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, Ethan. But today was a good day." I nodded, looking up at the clear blue September sky. "I just want to see my kids." "You will," he promised. "And now we shift from defense to offense. Vanessa's shown her hand, and it's weaker than she thought. Now we show ours." 3 days after the hearing, I stood anxiously in my hotel room, straightening throw pillows that were already perfectly aligned. The court had ordered Vanessa to bring Emma and Noah to this neutral location, a family-friendly suite Kevin had suggested as less intimidating than his office. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 1:47 p.m. They were already 17 minutes late. "She's doing this deliberately," I muttered to Kevin, who sat calmly reviewing documents at the small dining table, "playing games right up to the last minute." He glanced up. "Standard tactics. Establishes control, creates anxiety. Don't let it get to you. Remember, stay focused on the kids, not on her behavior." At 1:53, a gentle knock came at the door. I froze momentarily, then moved toward it with measured steps, following Kevin's advice to appear composed. When I opened the door, Emma and Noah stood there, Vanessa slightly behind them, her hand resting possessively on Noah's shoulder. Emma, my beautiful 8-year-old with her dark curls and serious eyes, looked up at me uncertainly. Noah clutched a tattered stuffed dinosaur I'd brought him from a trip to London last year. The sight of them, physically unchanged yet somehow different, made my throat tighten. "Daddy!" Noah broke free from Vanessa's grip and launched himself at my legs. I knelt down, enveloping him in a hug that felt simultaneously familiar and desperate, his small arms wrapped around my neck with surprising strength. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, different from the one we used to buy. "I've missed you so much." Emma approached more cautiously, her eyes darting between me and her mother. I extended my arm to include her in the embrace, relief washing over me when she stepped forward. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. Vanessa remained in the doorway, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. She wore designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, a casual but expensive-looking outfit, and noticeably more makeup than she typically wore in Boston. "The court order specifies 4 hours," she said coolly. "I'll be back at 6. She turned to the children. "Be good for your father. Remember what we talked about." Something in her tone made me wonder exactly what those conversations had entailed, but I pushed the thought aside. This moment was about reconnecting with my children, not dwelling on Vanessa's manipulations. As the door closed behind her, I felt the tension in the room shift. Kevin stood, collected his papers, and gave me an encouraging nod. "I'll be back at 5:30, he said. "Enjoy your time together." The first hour was awkward, unsurprisingly. The children seemed hesitant, responding to my questions with short answers. Emma, especially, appeared to be measuring her words carefully. "Are you living in California now?" I asked as we sat around the coffee table with the snacks I'd prepared, their favorites, strawberries for Emma and cheese crackers for Noah. Emma nodded. "With Uncle Tyler. We have a pool. And a dog," Noah added excitedly. "His name is Rocket, and he's super fast." "That sounds nice," I said, trying to keep jealousy from coloring my tone. "Do you like your new school, Em?" She shrugged. "It's okay. I haven't really started yet. Mum says we might not stay there." I carefully avoided reacting to this revelation. Evidence that Vanessa had known her California relocation might not be permanent. Instead, I suggested we play one of the board games I'd purchased for the occasion. Gradually, the children relaxed. Noah climbed onto my lap during his turns, and Emma's smiles became less guarded. By the third round of Candyland, they were laughing and competing with their usual enthusiasm. "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" Noah asked suddenly, with the unfiltered directness of a 5-year-old. "No, buddy," I lied, maintaining the composure Kevin had emphasized was crucial. Sometimes, grown-ups have disagreements about important things, but we both love you and Emma very much. Emma watched me carefully, clearly processing my answer with more sophistication than her brother. "Mom says you care more about your work than about us," she said, her voice small but her gaze unflinching. The accusation, clearly planted by Vanessa, hit like a physical blow. "That's not true, Emma," I said gently. "My work is important, because it helps me take care of our family, but nothing is more important to me than you and Noah. Nothing." "Then why were you always gone?" The question contained no accusation, just genuine confusion. I took a deep breath, considering how to explain complex adult realities to an 8-year-old. Sometimes parents have to make difficult choices. My job required travel, but I always tried to be present when I was home. Remember our weekend adventures, our camping trips? Those moments mean everything to me. Emma seemed to consider this. "Are we going to live with you again?" "I hope so," I said honestly. "I'm working very hard to make that happen. But no, matter what, I'll always be your dad, and I'll always be part of your lives." Noah, less attuned to the underlying currents, looked up hopefully. "Can we go camping this weekend?" His innocent question broke the tension, and I laughed. "Not this weekend, buddy, but soon, I promise." The remainder of our visit passed in a blur of games, stories, and careful conversations. I avoided asking directly about Vanessa or their sudden move, focusing instead on rebuilding our connection. By the time Kevin returned, the children were cuddled against me on the sofa as I read from a book I'd bought that morning. Kevin's expression told me he was pleased with the scene. A father clearly bonded with his children, nothing like the distant workaholic Vanessa had portrayed in court. All too soon, a sharp knock announced Vanessa's return. The children's demeanor changed instantly, Noah growing quieter, Emma more watchful. The transformation confirmed my suspicions that Vanessa had been coaching them. "Did you have a good time?" Vanessa asked, her voice artificially bright as she entered. "We played Candyland and Daddy read us a new book," Noah reported. "And we had ice cream." "Sounds wonderful," she replied, not looking at me. "Time to go now. Say goodbye to your father." The parting was painful, Noah clinging to my neck, Emma trying to be brave, but her eyes filling with tears. "When will we see you again, Daddy?" she whispered. "Very soon," I promised, looking pointedly at Vanessa. "We're working that out right now." After they left, I collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally drained. Kevin sat beside me. "That went well," he observed. "The kids are clearly attached to you. They're different," I said, cautious. "Emma's repeating things Vanessa must have told her." "Parental alienation," Kevin nodded grimly. "We suspected as much. But the good news is, it hasn't taken root deeply yet. And what we saw today strengthens our case considerably." The next morning, we met with Judge Henning in chambers to establish a temporary custody schedule until the formal hearing. Vanessa and Littleton argued for the children to return to California with her, claiming they had already started to establish new lives there. "Your Honor," Littleton argued, "uprooting the children again would cause unnecessary trauma. Mrs. Mercer has enrolled them in excellent schools, arranged for psychological support to help them adjust to their parents' separation, and created a stable environment with extended family support," Kevin countered forcefully. "An environment created through deception and in violation of Massachusetts law, Your Honor. The children lived their entire lives in this state until Mrs. Mercer abruptly relocated them without consent during Mr. Mercer's business trip. The acid trauma here was inflicted by Mrs. Mercer's actions, not by returning the children to their home state." Judge Henning considered both arguments, then delivered her ruling. The children would remain in Massachusetts with a temporary shared custody arrangement, weekdays with Vanessa, who would need to relocate back to the state immediately, weekends with me. Neither parent could take the children out of state without court permission. Vanessa's face tightened with barely controlled fury as the judge outlined the terms. Littleton placed a restraining hand on her arm when she seemed about to protest. "Furthermore," Judge Henning continued, "the court orders a full psychological evaluation of both children to assess any emotional impact from the abrupt relocation and to determine if parental alienation has occurred." As we left the courthouse, Littleton approached Kevin with a revised settlement offer. "My client is willing to consider joint physical custody and a more equitable financial arrangement," she said stiffly. Kevin glanced at the document without breaking stride. "We'll review this and respond accordingly, but I should note that our position has strengthened, not weakened, since our last discussion." Once in Kevin's car, I asked about the sudden shift in Vanessa's position. "She's realizing. Her strategy is backfiring," he explained. "The judge clearly doesn't buy her concerned mother act. The children demonstrated a strong bond with you yesterday, and now she's facing potential findings of parental alienation." He smiled grimly. "Plus, I suspect our friend Diane nearly had a stroke when she reviewed those emails we provided." The next 2 weeks established a new, uneasy rhythm. Vanessa reluctantly rented a furnished apartment in our old neighborhood, while I moved from the hotel to a small house nearby that I'd leased for 6 months. The children shuttled between our homes according to the court schedule, gradually adjusting to the new arrangement. Despite the surface compliance, Vanessa continued her campaign in subtler ways. Emma would return from her mother's with comments about Daddy's big, important job that takes him away from us. Noah occasionally asked if I was going to disappear, again revealing Vanessa's continued narrative that I had abandoned them. On the financial front, our forensic accountant completed his full analysis, revealing even more concerning patterns. In addition to the large transfers made during my Tokyo trip, Vanessa had been systematically siphoning smaller amounts, between $2,000 and $5,000 monthly, for over 2 years, building a separate financial cushion I knew nothing about. More disturbing was the discovery that she'd accessed my personal email account repeatedly over the past year, specifically targeting communications with Altura's executive team about the Nakamura deal and its compensation implications. She'd also photographed documents from my home office, including confidential company information about the acquisition timeline. This goes beyond divorce planning. the forensic accountant noted during our meeting. This level of systematic intelligence gathering suggests something more calculated. Kevin agreed. The timeline is revealing. She began this surveillance shortly after your company announced the acquisition. She was tracking the financial milestones, waiting for peak value before making her move. I struggled to reconcile this. Methodical predator with the woman I'd married, but why take the kids to California? Why not just divorce me and take her share? Kevin exchanged glances with the accountant. 2 reasons, most likely. First, establishing residence in California potentially means more favorable divorce terms. Second, and more importantly, using the children as leverage increases her negotiating position for a settlement. The psychological evaluations of the children confirmed our concerns about parental alienation. The court-appointed psychologist documented numerous instances where the children repeated negative narratives about me that originated with Vanessa, though she noted that their natural bond with me remained strong despite these efforts. Armed with this evidence, Kevin filed a motion for primary physical custody, citing Vanessa's systematic pattern of alienation and demonstrated willingness to use the children as pawns in a financial strategy. Littleton countered with increasingly desperate arguments, focusing on my work schedule as evidence that I couldn't provide consistent care. At one particularly tense hearing, she brought forwarded emails from my company account showing late-night work sessions and weekend conference calls. Your Honor, she argued, Mr. Mercer's professed devotion to his children simply doesn't align with his actual lifestyle. These communications show a man who routinely prioritizes work over family time. Kevin was ready. Interesting that counsel should mention these emails, he replied smoothly. We'd like to direct the court's attention to exactly how Mrs. Mercer obtained these private communications. He presented evidence from our digital forensics expert showing Vanessa had installed spyware on my laptop nearly 2 years earlier. Judge Henning's expression darkened as she reviewed the evidence. Ms. Littleton, is your client aware that unauthorized access to private email accounts potentially violates federal law? Littleton appeared genuinely surprised by this revelation, suggesting Vanessa hadn't been fully forthcoming even with her own attorney. We'll need to confer about this new information, Your Honor, she said stiffly. Outside the courtroom, I overheard Littleton berating Vanessa in a harsh whisper. You need to tell me everything, not just what supports your narrative. We're now defending against potential criminal violations on top of losing custody ground. That evening, as I helped Emma with her homework, while Noah built an elaborate Lego structure on the living room floor, I received an unexpected call from an unfamiliar number. It was Tyler, Vanessa's brother. Ethan, we need to talk, he said. His voice tense, not about the case directly, but there are things you should know. Against Kevin's previous advice to avoid unsupervised communications with anyone in Vanessa's camp, I agreed to meet Tyler the following morning at a coffee shop near the courthouse. I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance, half expecting Vanessa to appear instead in some kind of ambush, but it was indeed Tyler who walked in, looking significantly less polished than in the family photos on display in our home. His expression was troubled as he slid into the seat across from me. I can't do this anymore, he began without preamble. Vanessa's spiraling, and I'm not going to go down with her. Do what exactly? I asked cautiously. Tyler glanced around, then leaned forward. It wasn't supposed to go this far, moving the kids across the country, the restraining order. That wasn't part of the original plan. What was the original plan? He hesitated, clearly wrestling with familial loyalty. Look, about a year ago, after your company announced the acquisition, Vanessa approached me, said your marriage was basically over, but she needed to maximize her position before filing for divorce, wanted my help setting up some financial structures. The Nevada LLC, I supplied. He nodded. Among others, I'm in real estate. I know people who know how to create these arrangements. It was just supposed to be about protecting assets. He ran a hand through his hair. Then it kept evolving. She became obsessed with your company's acquisition timeline, tracking when different payments would hit. Why are you telling me this now? Because she's gotten reckless. After the judge ordered her back to Massachusetts, He paused. She's making threats, talking about taking the kids and disappearing if things don't go her way. She's not thinking clearly anymore. A chill ran through me. Has she said this explicitly? Last night, she called me, furious about something that happened in court. Said the judge was biased, that you had somehow manipulated the system. Said she might just solve the problem directly if the legal route doesn't work. He met my eyes directly. I have a recording of the call. I stared at him, processing the implications. Why would you record your sister? Self-preservation. When this started getting complicated, I began documenting everything. I've got a law license to protect. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on here. Emails, recorded calls, financial documentation. I'm not going to perjure myself or risk disbarment for her vendetta. I pocketed the drive, without looking at it. Why did she really take the kids to California? Be honest. Tyler sighed deeply. Initially it was about jurisdiction, better divorce terms, but then it became, I don't know, a way to hurt you, to have leverage. She became fixated on the idea that you cared more about your career than your family, so she'd take the thing you supposedly didn't value enough. He shook his head. I think she started believing her own narrative. And the money? Nearly $1 million disappeared. Most of it's still in the Nevada accounts. Some went into the Manhattan Beach house. It's technically in my name, but she controls it. And about $150,000 went to offshore accounts I don't have details on. After Tyler left, I sat for a long time, turning the flash drive over in my hands, before calling Kevin. He immediately arranged for a digital forensics team to analyze its contents before we viewed anything, ensuring its authenticity and admissibility. What they found was more damning than even I had anticipated. Detailed correspondences between Vanessa and Tyler spanning 18 months, outlining an evolving strategy to maximize financial extraction, coinciding with my company's acquisition timeline. Spreadsheets tracking my company's stock values and vesting schedules, calculations of potential divorce settlements under different jurisdictional scenarios. Most disturbing were recorded conversations where Vanessa explicitly discussed using the children as negotiating leverage, including one call just 3 days before my Tokyo trip, where she told Tyler, "Once the final payment hits, I'll execute. While he's in Japan, having the kids will strengthen my position when we negotiate." Kevin was uncharacteristically quiet as we reviewed the evidence in his office. "In 22 years of family law," he finally said, "I've rarely seen this level of calculated exploitation. This changes everything, Ethan." Kevin moved with unprecedented urgency after reviewing Tyler's evidence. "We're approaching this from multiple angles now," he explained, as his team worked through the night preparing filings. Family court for custody, civil court for financial fraud, and potentially criminal referrals for identity theft, unauthorized computer access, and interstate transportation of children for unlawful purposes. The following morning, we appeared before Judge Henning for an emergency hearing. Vanessa arrived late, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Littleton seemed tense, repeatedly checking her phone before court was called to order. Kevin presented the new evidence methodically, beginning with the financial conspiracy and building to the recorded conversations about using the children as leverage. As each damning piece was entered into evidence, I watched Vanessa's face. Her expression moved from confident dismissal to growing alarm as she realized the extent of what Tyler had provided. Judge Henning's demeanor grew increasingly severe. When the recording of Vanessa discussing executing her plan during my Tokyo trip played in the courtroom, she removed her glasses and stared directly at Vanessa. "Ms. Littleton, does your client wish to respond to this evidence?" the judge asked when the recording finished. Littleton conferred briefly with Vanessa, their whispered exchange becoming visibly heated. Finally, Littleton stood. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to review these materials, which we're seeing for the first time today." "Granted. 1 hour," Judge Henning replied curtly. In the courthouse corridor, Kevin received a call from the forensic accountant. After a brief conversation, he turned to me with a grim smile. "We've located the offshore accounts, Cayman Islands, opened 9 months ago. The money trail is complete now." When court reconvened, Littleton's strategy had visibly shifted. Gone was the aggressive portrayal of Vanessa as the wronged spouse. Instead, she attempted damage control. "Your Honor, while some of these recordings may sound concerning when taken out of context, they represent private venting during a difficult marital period, not actual intent. Mrs. Mercer acted out of genuine concern for her children's welfare and financial security." Judge Henning's response was withering. "Counsel, I've reviewed transcripts where your client explicitly discusses timing her actions to coincide with financial events and using children as negotiating leverage. This goes far beyond private venting." She turned her attention directly to Vanessa. "Mrs. Mercer, this court has seen significant evidence of calculated financial misconduct, potential criminal violations, and most disturbingly, the deliberate use of minor children as instruments of financial leverage. Do you understand the seriousness of these findings?" Vanessa, looking suddenly small in her designer suit, nodded mutely. The judge's ruling was comprehensive and immediate. I was granted temporary full custody of Emma and Noah, with Vanessa, limited to supervised visitation, pending further proceedings. All assets were to be frozen and a full forensic accounting completed within 10 days. The court would forward evidence to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. As we left the courtroom, Littleton approached Kevin with unprecedented humility. "We need to talk settlement, immediately." Over the next 2 days, negotiations moved at lightning speed. Vanessa, facing potential criminal charges and the complete collapse of her strategy, agreed to terms she would have rejected outright weeks earlier. The final agreement included joint legal custody, but primary physical custody awarded to me, with Vanessa granted structured visitation, return of all transferred assets to be equitably divided, Vanessa's agreement to attend therapeutic counseling, with the children to address alienation attempts, a mutual non-disparagement clause with enforceable penalties. Vanessa's permanent waiver of any claim to future compensation from Altura. When I asked Kevin about the surprisingly favorable terms, he was candid. "She's cutting her losses. The evidence against her is overwhelming, and Littleton has likely explained that she's facing potential criminal charges that this settlement doesn't protect her from. She's hoping cooperation now might influence prosecutorial discretion later." The most difficult task was explaining the situation to Emma and Noah. With guidance from the court-appointed child psychologist, I carefully framed the changes in terms they could understand, emphasizing that both parents loved them despite adult problems. "Your mom and I have figured out how things will work going forward," I explained as we sat in our favorite ice cream shop. "You'll be living primarily with me, but you'll still see Mom regularly." Emma, perceptive as always, studied my face. "Is Mom in trouble? I heard her crying on the phone last night." I chose my words carefully. "Your mom made some mistakes that have consequences, but she loves you both very much. The most important thing is that you two are going to be okay." Noah, still too young to fully comprehend the situation, was more concerned with immediate matters. "Can we go back to our real house soon? I miss my room." His innocent question highlighted the practical challenges ahead. Our family home had been rented out during the turmoil, and my temporary housing wasn't ideal for long-term family life. With the legal battle winding down, I needed to create stability for the children. That weekend, while the children were with Vanessa for their supervised visit, I drove to our old neighborhood. The familiar streets carried bittersweet memories: family bike rides, Halloween trick-or-treating, Emma learning to roller skate on the sidewalk. This had been a good place to raise children before Vanessa's actions had shattered our foundation. A for sale sign caught my eye 3 streets over from our old house. It was a Victorian-style home with a wraparound porch and a spacious yard, backing onto the community park where Noah had played t-ball last spring. On impulse, I called the number on the sign. The realtor showed me through the house that afternoon. It needed work: outdated kitchen, worn carpeting upstairs. But it had potential: 4 bedrooms, a sunny breakfast nook, and most importantly, walking distance to the children's school and their familiar neighborhood friends. "The owners are motivated," the realtor explained. "They've already purchased their new home and are eager to close quickly." Standing in what could become Emma and Noah's playroom, looking out at the maple tree perfect for a tire swing, I made a decision. This would be our fresh start, a place unconstrained by memories of betrayal. I made an offer that evening, using my portion of the assets recovered from Vanessa's scheme. The owners accepted within hours. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of forward momentum, of building something new rather than just salvaging what remained. When I picked up the children from their visitation, I took a calculated risk. Instead of driving to our temporary housing, I drove to the Victorian. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, looking confused as we pulled into an unfamiliar driveway. "I want to show you something," I said, trying to contain my nervous excitement. "It's not finished yet, but I wanted your opinion." I led them through the empty house, describing possibilities: Emma's room overlooking the garden, Noah's room with space for his Lego collection, a basement we could convert into a movie room for family nights. "Would we live here?" Noah asked, running excited circles in the spacious kitchen. "If you like it," I answered. "I thought we could make this our new home, together." Emma walked through the rooms more deliberately, touching door frames, looking out windows. Finally, she turned to me with a cautious smile. "It doesn't have a swimming pool like Uncle Tyler's house," she said, "but I like the tree in the backyard. Could we put up a hammock?" "Absolutely," I promised, relief washing over me. "And maybe a tree house, too." That night, after tucking the children into bed, I sat on the porch of our temporary rental and called my boss at Altura. Throughout the custody battle, he'd been surprisingly supportive, granting me flexible hours and remote work options. But I knew larger changes were needed. "Jim, we need to talk about my role going forward," I began. "The children are with me permanently now, and I need to restructure my position." To my surprise, Jim had already been considering alternatives. "The board was impressed with how you handled the Nakamura deal despite your personal situation. They've authorized me to offer you a senior advisory position, less travel, more strategic oversight, and primarily based in Boston." "There would be a compensation adjustment, I assume," I said, prepared for the financial reality of prioritizing family over career advancement. "Some, yes," Jim acknowledged, "but less than you might think. Your value to us isn't infrequent. Flyer miles, Ethan. It's in your strategic vision and relationships with key partners. We can work with the constraints of your new family situation." As I hung up, I realized how differently this conversation might have gone if I'd initiated it years earlier, before Vanessa's betrayal forced this reckoning. Perhaps the punishing travel schedule I'd maintained hadn't been as necessary as I'd believed. The insight was simultaneously liberating and painful, a lesson purchased at tremendous personal cost. The following week brought unexpected developments. The district attorney's office, after reviewing the evidence, decided to pursue criminal charges against Vanessa for identity theft, unauthorized computer access, and financial fraud. Littleton withdrew as her counsel, and Vanessa retained a criminal defense attorney. Tyler, seeking to distance himself from potential criminal liability, provided additional evidence of his sister's actions in exchange for immunity consideration. The most shocking revelation was a draft email found on Vanessa's cloud backup, never sent but written 3 weeks before my Tokyo trip. Once this is done, we'll have financial security regardless of what Ethan does next. I've documented everything necessary to show his abandonment of the family. Between California's family courts and your connections in LA, we can ensure minimal interference from him going forward. The children will adjust. They're resilient. The calculated coldness of the message still chills me when I recall it. The woman who wrote those words was a stranger wearing my wife's face, someone capable of methodically planning to separate her children from a father they loved as a financial strategy. Closing on the Victorian house provided a welcome distraction from the ongoing criminal proceedings. I threw myself into creating a warm, functional home for the children, involving them in age-appropriate decisions about colors and furnishings. Emma helped design her own room, choosing lavender walls and a window seat for reading. Noah was more concerned with ensuring his dinosaur collection had adequate display space. My parents flew in from Florida to help with the move, providing both practical assistance and emotional support. My father, a retired electrical engineer, rewired problematic lighting fixtures, while my mother organized the kitchen with her characteristic efficiency. Their presence was healing for the children, who delighted in the undivided attention of grandparents they'd seen too rarely during my marriage to Vanessa. "You're doing well, son," my father said quietly one evening as we shared a beer on the new porch after the children were asleep. "Better than I might have in your situation." His rare praise meant more than he could know. "I'm trying to focus on what matters," I replied. "The kids need stability more than I need vindication." He nodded, understanding what I left unsaid. "Your mother and I have been talking. We're considering selling the Florida place and moving closer. Not next door or anything," he added hastily, "but near enough to be more involved in the grandkids' lives." The offer of support touched me deeply. I think they'd like that. I would too. 2 weeks after moving into the Victorian, I received an unexpected email from Vanessa's criminal attorney requesting a meeting. Consulting with Kevin first, I agreed to hear what they had to propose. We met at Kevin's office, Vanessa accompanied by her new lawyer, a somber man named Greg Patterson, who specialized in white-collar defense. Vanessa looked markedly different. Designer clothes replaced by a simple blouse and slacks, her makeup minimal, her demeanor subdued. Patterson outlined their position without preamble. "My client is facing serious charges that could result in substantial jail time. The evidence against her is frankly overwhelming. We're exploring a plea arrangement with the DA's office, but the prosecutor has indicated that your position on the matter would carry significant weight." "What exactly are you asking for?" Kevin inquired, his tone neutral. "Mrs. Mercer is willing to accept full responsibility for her actions, make complete financial restitution, and comply with any probationary terms. In exchange, we're hoping Mr. Mercer might support a recommendation for probation rather than incarceration." I studied Vanessa, trying to discern genuine remorse from tactical positioning. Her eyes, when they briefly met mine, held something I hadn't seen before, not manipulation or anger, but something like resignation, perhaps even shame. "Why should I support leniency?" I asked directly. Given everything that's happened, Vanessa spoke for the first time, her voice lacking its usual confidence. For Emma and Noah, she said simply, I know I've done terrible things, made inexcusable choices, but I'm still their mother. They've already lost the family they knew. Losing me to prison would be another trauma for them. Kevin had prepared me for this argument, the most compelling she could offer. We'd discussed the research showing that children of incarcerated parents often suffered significant psychological impacts, regardless of the circumstances. I need assurances, I said finally, real ones, not just promises made to avoid consequences. Patterson nodded. We anticipated that. We're prepared to discuss specific terms. Over the next hour, we negotiated what would become my formal statement to the district attorney. Vanessa would plead guilty to reduced charges, accept 3 years probation with strict monitoring, undergo court-mandated therapy, and agree to a modified visitation schedule that prioritized the children's emotional stability. Most importantly, she would acknowledge in writing her actions regarding parental alienation and agree never to contest the custody arrangement without material change in circumstances. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa asked for a moment alone. With me, against Kevin's cautionary glance, I agreed. When the others had stepped outside, she spoke quietly. I know you won't believe this, and you have no reason to, but I'm sorry, Ethan. Not just for getting caught, for what I did to our family. I considered my response carefully, aware that this might be manipulation, but wanting to model civility, for our children's sake. I'm not interested in apologies, Vanessa. I'm interested in actions. Be the mother our children deserve going forward. That's all I ask. She nodded, her composure finally breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. For a moment, I glimpsed the woman I thought I'd married. Vulnerable, human, flawed, but not monstrous. The recognition didn't erase the betrayal, but it helped me understand how complex people could make devastating choices through incremental compromises. I will, she whispered. I promise. Driving home, I reflected on how dramatically my life had transformed in just 3 months. The career I'd prioritized had been restructured. The marriage I thought was solid had been revealed as fundamentally compromised. The wife I believed I knew had become a cautionary tale about trust and vigilance. Yet amid these painful revelations, unexpected gifts had emerged. My relationship with Emma and Noah had deepened through our shared resilience. My parents were returning to active roles in our lives. The crushing travel schedule that had kept me from so many family moments was now replaced with a more sustainable balance. As I pulled into the driveway of our new home, Emma and Noah burst through the front door, running to meet me with updates about their day. My mother appeared in the doorway, smiling as she watched their enthusiasm. In that moment, I understood something essential about resilience. It wasn't about emerging unscathed from life's betrayals. It was about gathering the fragments of what remained and building something new, something that honored the pain of the past without being defined by it. Emma tugged my hand, eager to show me the science project she'd completed with her grandmothers. Help! Noah bounced alongside us, recounting playground adventures with dramatic flair. My mother held the door open, the aroma of home-cooked dinner wafting into the evening air. This, I realized, was victory, not the legal judgments or financial settlements, but this moment of ordinary joy, reclaimed from extraordinary betrayal. We were building a new story together, word by word, day by day. 6 months after the court proceedings, our new life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The Victorian house had transformed from an empty shell into a true home, decorated with a blend of familiar treasures from our past and new pieces chosen to reflect our fresh start. Emma and Noah had adapted to the changes with the remarkable resilience children often demonstrate, though occasional emotional storms reminded us all that healing takes time. My restructured role at Altura proved surprisingly fulfilling. Working primarily from a home office, I was able to attend school events, coach Noah's T-ball team, and help Emma with her increasingly complex homework without sacrificing my professional contributions. The board had even implemented some of my suggestions for reducing unnecessary travel across the executive team, recognizing that continuous globe-trotting wasn't always essential for business success. Vanessa, for her part, had complied with all court-mandated requirements. Her supervised visits with the children gradually transitioned to more normalized arrangements as she demonstrated genuine effort in therapy. While our interactions remained strictly focused on co-parenting matters, the bitter acrimony had faded into a workable, if distant, civility. On a crisp October morning, I sat at the kitchen island, reviewing quarterly projections, while Emma practiced piano in the living room, and Noah constructed an elaborate Lego city at my feet. The doorbell's chime interrupted this peaceful domestic scene. I opened the door to find Linda Kessler, the forensic accountant who had been instrumental in tracking Vanessa's financial maneuvers. Her unexpected appearance immediately put me on alert. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said, "but I discovered something you should see immediately." I invited her in, settling Noah with his Legos in the family room before joining Linda at the dining table where she had already opened her laptop. "I've been working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit on an unrelated case," she explained, "when I came across transaction patterns identical to what we saw with Vanessa's accounts." She turned the screen toward me, displaying a complex flowchart of financial movements. The same shell company structures, the same Nevada LLC configurations, even the same offshore banking patterns in the Caymans. "Meaning what exactly?" I asked, studying the familiar-looking diagram. "Meaning Vanessa didn't invent this scheme. She followed a template, one that's been used in at least 14 other cases we've identified so far." Linda's expression was grim. "All divorces, all targeting high-earning spouses during significant financial events like acquisitions, IPOs, or major bonus payouts." The implications slowly crystallized. "You're saying there's some kind of divorce conspiracy?" "Not exactly conspiracy, but definitely a methodology being shared. We've traced it to a private consulting firm called Marital Asset Protection Strategies, MAPS. They position themselves as financial advisors, helping spouses protect their fair share in high-asset divorces." She navigated to a password-protected website with a bland, professional interface. "They don't advertise publicly. Clients come through referrals, usually from certain divorce attorneys who specialize in representing non-earning spouses in high-asset divorces." "Like Diane Littleton," I said, pieces falling into place. Linda nodded. "Exactly. The FBI subpoenaed their client records. Vanessa engaged their services 18 months ago, right around when your company announced the acquisition." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa's betrayal hadn't been entirely personal. It had been, at least in part, a commercial service she'd purchased. The methodical precision that had seemed so calculating wasn't just her. She'd been following a playbook designed by professionals who specialized in maximizing financial extraction from marriages. "There's more," Linda continued. "The FBI is building a case against MAPS for potential wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. They're interviewing former clients, including Vanessa. What does this mean for our settlement?" I asked, mind racing through potential implications. "Nothing directly. Your divorce is finalized, assets distributed, but Vanessa's cooperation with the federal investigation could impact her criminal sentencing." Linda hesitated. "The prosecutor wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet with their team. Your case documentation is apparently one of the most comprehensive they've seen." I agreed to the meeting, scheduled for the following week. After Linda left, I sat on the porch, processing this new context for Vanessa's actions. While it didn't excuse her choices, understanding that she'd been following expert guidance rather than inventing the scheme herself shifted my perspective slightly. She hadn't betrayed our family in a vacuum. She'd been influenced by professionals who had normalized and systematized such betrayal. The meeting with federal prosecutors revealed the full scope of MAP's operations. Founded by a disbarred attorney and a former hedge fund manager, the firm had serviced over 200 clients in the past 5 years, generating millions in consulting fees while facilitating the transfer of hundreds of millions in marital assets. Their methods weren't technically illegal, merely practicing at the extreme edge of aggressive divorce strategy, but their financial structures often crossed into tax evasion and fraud. "We're particularly interested in the parental alienation aspects," explained Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Benson. Most MAPS clients followed financial strategies only, but a subset implemented what they called leverage optimization, involving children. Your case provides clear documentation of those tactics. I felt a cold anger hearing our family trauma reduced to clinical terminology. Leverage optimization. That's what they called using my children as pawns? Benson nodded grimly. Their internal documents are surprisingly explicit. They categorized client spouses as either financial primary or emotional primary. For the latter, they recommended creating negotiating asymmetry through control of children or other emotional leverage points. The conversation left me profoundly unsettled. That night, after the children were asleep, I called Kevin to discuss these revelations. "I'm not surprised," he said after I explained. "I've suspected something like this existed for years. Certain opposing counsel always seemed to follow the same playbook, with clients who displayed identical strategy patterns despite different circumstances." "How does knowing this change things?" I asked, still struggling to integrate this new information. Kevin was thoughtful. "Legally, not much, but personally, it might actually help with healing. Vanessa's actions weren't entirely personal vindictiveness. She was implementing a strategy sold to her by predatory consultants who normalized extreme tactics." "That doesn't make it less devastating," I countered. "No," he agreed, "but it might make it less about you specifically. Less about your marriage failing and more about her being manipulated into a destructive path by professionals who profit from family destruction." His framing offered a perspective I hadn't considered. While Vanessa had ultimately made her own choices, understanding the systematic nature of the approach made the betrayal slightly less personal, slightly more comprehensible. A vulnerable person being guided toward her worst instincts by those who stood to profit. 2 weeks later, I received a formal request from the U.S. Attorney's Office to testify before a grand jury investigating MAPS. After consulting with Kevin and carefully considering potential impacts on my family, I agreed. My testimony would focus strictly on the financial and custody strategies employed, avoiding unnecessary personal details that might eventually become public record. The day before my scheduled grand jury appearance, Vanessa requested an urgent meeting. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe after I dropped the children at school. She arrived looking nervous but composed, dressed simply in contrast to her former designer wardrobe. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after ordering tea. "I've been cooperating with the federal investigation into MAPS. My attorney thinks it will help with my sentencing, but that's not why I'm doing it." She met my eyes directly. "I'm doing it because I need to face what I participated in." I remained silent, giving her space to continue. "When I first contacted MAPS, I was unhappy, but not planning to destroy our family. I just wanted to understand my options." Her hands fidgeted with her napkin. They conducted what they called a vulnerability assessment of our marriage and my position within it. They identified my insecurities about financial independence, my resentment about your travel schedule, my fears about growing older while you were constantly surrounded by younger colleagues. She took a shaky breath. Each consultation escalated the strategy. First just documenting your absences, then setting up separate accounts, then more aggressive measures. They normalized everything, made it seem like standard protection rather than what it was, a systematic dismantling of our marriage for profit. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Because you're testifying tomorrow, and I wanted you to understand the full context, not to excuse. What I did, I made my choices, but because knowing how these people operate might help protect others." She hesitated. "And because I owe you the truth, even if it comes too late." She explained how MAPS had provided detailed coaching, templates for documenting grievances, scripts for speaking to children about an absent parent, strategies for creating documentation that would support later legal claims. "The children were my line in the sand initially," she admitted. "I told them I wouldn't use Emma and Noah as leverage, but they kept emphasizing how the financial outcomes would be substantially reduced without custody leverage." Her voice broke slightly. "They had case studies showing the difference in settlements with and without primary custody. They made it seem rational, almost responsible to maximize my position." "When did you realize it was wrong?" I asked, genuinely curious about her moral journey. "The night before I executed the plan, watching you pack for Tokyo." Her eyes grew distant with the memory. "You asked me to tell Emma you'd video call for her science presentation, and I said I would, knowing I was planning to be in California by then, to tell her you'd forgotten. That's when I recognized what I'd become. But I convinced myself it was too late to change course, that I'd invested too much in the strategy to abandon it." Her candor was unexpected and strangely healing, not because it erased the betrayal, but because it restored a measure of humanity to someone who had seemed monstrous in her calculated actions. "I've been doing intensive therapy," she continued. "Not just the court-mandated sessions, but real work on understanding why I was vulnerable to their influence, why I justified actions I knew were wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, Ethan. I just want you to know I'm committed to being better for Emma and Noah, to never putting them in that position again." As we parted, she handed me a sealed envelope. "This is for the prosecutors. Documentation. I've been afraid to share until now. Communications with other MAPS clients, strategy sessions I recorded, everything. My attorney doesn't even know I have these." My testimony before the grand jury the following day was straightforward but emotionally draining, recounting the systematic dismantling of my family for strangers, even in a confidential proceeding, reopened wounds I'd thought were healing. Yet there was also something cathartic about placing our personal tragedy into a larger context of predatory business practices being addressed through proper channels. 2 months later, the grand jury returned indictments against MAPS founders and several associated attorneys, including Diane Littleton, for conspiracy, wire fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. The investigation had expanded to include over 30 divorce cases with similar patterns, revealing a network of professionals who had profited from family destruction. The federal prosecutor called personally to inform me that Vanessa's cooperation had been instrumental in mapping the full scope of MAPS operations. As a result, the DA's office had recommended reduced probation terms for her state charges, with no incarceration. I found myself surprisingly supportive of this outcome, not for Vanessa's sake, but for Emma and Noah, who deserved a healthy relationship with both parents if possible. As winter settled over Boston, bringing the first anniversary of my Tokyo trip and the upheaval that followed, I found myself in a reflective mood. Sitting in my home office late one evening, I began writing what I initially thought would be notes for a possible victim impact statement if the federal case went to trial. Instead, it evolved into something more personal, lessons distilled from the crucible of betrayal and reconstruction. I wrote about the danger of defining success primarily through professional achievement, how I had rationalized excessive travel and absences as necessary sacrifices rather than choices with consequences. I acknowledged my own role in creating distance in my marriage, not to excuse Vanessa's actions, but to understand the vulnerability she had exploited. Most importantly, I documented the process of rebuilding, not just practical aspects like establishing new household routines and restructuring work obligations, but the emotional journey of redefining success and happiness after profound betrayal. My reflections caught the attention of Jim, my boss at Altura, when I shared them during a conversation about work-life integration. "This isn't just your story, Ethan," he said thoughtfully. "It's relevant to every executive pushing family to the periphery while chasing the next deal. Have you considered sharing it more broadly?" At his encouragement, I developed my notes into an article for the Harvard Business Review titled "The Hidden Costs of Success: Protecting Family Bonds in High-Pressure Careers." To my surprise, it resonated widely, generating conversations throughout the business community about the vulnerability of achievement-focused professionals to both family breakdown and predatory services that exploited such breakdowns. The article led to speaking invitations, first at Altura's leadership retreat, then at industry conferences focused on executive well-being. I was initially reluctant, protective of my privacy and the children's stability, but conversations with Emma and Noah's therapist helped me recognize the potential value in transforming our painful experience into constructive guidance for others. "Dad, are you famous now?" Emma asked after seeing my name on a conference program left on the kitchen counter. "Tyler in my class said his dad read something you wrote." I smiled, pulling her into a side hug. "Not famous, just sharing some lessons I learned the hard way, hoping other parents might learn them the easy way." "About Mom taking us to California?" Her directness still occasionally caught me off guard. "Partly about that, but mostly about making sure work doesn't become more important than family, about being present for the people you love." She considered this with the seriousness typical of her 9-year-old wisdom. "You're better at that now. You're at all my soccer games." Coming from Emma, this simple observation felt like the highest praise I could receive. The metrics of success had fundamentally shifted in my life, from deals closed and bonuses earned to moments present and connections maintained. Spring brought unexpected developments. The federal case against MAPS attracted national media attention, with several major outlets running investigative features on divorce predators who targeted high-earning professionals during vulnerable periods. I declined most interview requests, prioritizing our family's privacy, but the story spread nonetheless. One evening, I received a call from a senior executive at a Fortune 100 company who had read my HBR article. "The same thing happened to me 3 years ago," he confided. "Almost identical playbook during our company's IPO. I lost primary custody of my daughters and half my life's work. I thought I was alone in experiencing something so calculated." This conversation led to others, revealing a surprising number of professionals, predominantly but not exclusively men, who had experienced similar targeted divorces during significant financial events. What had seemed like isolated personal tragedies were revealed as part of a troubling pattern. Working with Kevin and several other family law attorneys, we established a support network for those who had experienced such situations. The focus wasn't on vilifying ex-spouses, but on recovery, co-parenting after betrayal, and advocacy for family court reforms that would better identify orchestrated alienation attempts. Vanessa, Having completed her required therapy and maintaining consistent visitation with the children, gradually earned increased parenting time, while our personal relationship remained strictly functional, centered entirely on the children's needs. I observed genuine efforts on her part to rebuild trust. With Emma and Noah, during one custody exchange, she hesitated at the door after the children had run inside. "I saw the support group you've started," she said. "It's good work, important work." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected acknowledgement. "I've been speaking to my therapist about possibly participating," she continued, "not as a member, obviously, but to provide perspective from the other side. Only if it would be helpful, and only if you're comfortable with it." The offer surprised me. "I'll think about it," I replied honestly. "It could be valuable, but I'd need to consider the implications carefully." As I closed the door, I realized how far we had come from the raw devastation of a year earlier. Not to reconciliation or even friendship, but to a place where constructive communication was possible, where the focus had shifted from mutual harm to potential healing, not just for ourselves and our children, but potentially for others facing similar circumstances. That night, sitting on the porch swing that had become my favorite spot for reflection, I watched the spring twilight settle over our neighborhood. Emma's bike lay on its side in the driveway, abandoned when she'd spotted her best friend next door. Noah's soccer ball rested against the maple tree that now sported the tire swing I'd promised. I thought about the concept of success I had pursued so relentlessly before Tokyo, the next deal, the bigger bonus, the career advancement that always seemed to require just one more sacrifice of family time. How hollow that version of success appeared now, compared to the rich texture of daily life with Emma and Noah. The greatest triumph hadn't been the legal victories or financial recoveries, significant though they were. It had been the reconstruction of meaning and purpose from the wreckage of betrayal, finding a way to transform personal pain into protection for others, professional expertise into balanced prosperity, and fractured family bonds into new configurations of love and presence. As darkness fell, I could hear Emma and Noah chatting upstairs as they prepared for bed. Their voices, animated, ordinary, precious, were the true measure of success, the genuine dividend of lessons painfully learned, but ultimately transformative. The path forward would never be perfect or without complexity. Co-parenting with Vanessa would always require vigilance and boundaries. Balancing career demands with family needs would remain a daily negotiation rather than a resolved equation. The children would continue processing their experiences in ways I couldn't always anticipate or immediately address. But sitting there, in the gathering darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the Tokyo trip, a sense of genuine alignment between my outward life and inner values, between what I professed to prioritize and how I actually lived each day. The lawyer, who had nearly choked when confronted with evidence of Vanessa's calculated betrayal, could never have anticipated this outcome. Not just justice in court, but the deeper justice of reclaimed purpose and reconstructed joy. From the ashes of what had been lost emerged something unexpected, not a return to what was, but the creation of something more authentic, more aligned with fundamental truths about what truly constitutes a successful life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.